Sporting 1, Arsenal 5. We are very much back. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Raw Reaction Show, joining you the morning after Arsenal's 5-1 win over Sporting Lisbon in the Champions League. What a fantastic victory, what a brilliant result, what a great performance, and certainly one I think will revitalise a lot of the belief and hope amongst Arsenal supporters for sure. As they try and return, of course, from what has been a really tumultuous and disappointing period to be an Arsenal fan over the last month or so. Of course, several games without a win, defeats, of course, in the Champions League to Inter Milan, defeats in the Premier League, draws against teams we should be beating, and the title race looking very difficult for Arsenal. But the season, as I tried to explain to many of you before, is and has been far from done. There is plenty to play for, not just in the league, and I think that Arsenal's form hopefully will help them, regain some traction in the league, but also the Champions League, their ambitions there, and the cup competitions as well. And a performance like we saw yesterday evening is certainly going to be everything to give us that little bit of energy to appreciate things that much more. Please make sure you're dropping a like on the video, of course, subscribing to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. I hope the audio is coming across fine. I hope the picture's okay. Again, apologies for the slight changes. If you're unaware from yesterday's show, I am currently in Spain and don't have my usual equipment with me. So this is what it's going to be for today and tomorrow, and then we're back to the usual stuff on Friday. But good morning to those joining us in the chat. Martin, Black Shine, Pika Who. We've got Black Shine, Olawale, Errol. We've got Damien and Louis. We've got Cam Clothing. We've got Pat and Mark. Good morning to you guys as well. Thank you to you all for tuning in. As I say, drop a like, help us out. It's very much appreciated. And as we will do, we'll get to part 2. We'll get to your comments and thoughts in part 2. But without further ado, let's go into today's slides and, of course, the breakdown of yesterday's performance. We are, as the slide says there, so incredibly back. Arsenal 5, Sporting Lisbon 1. Dominant performance, clinical display, fantastic. Probably one of the best that we've seen under Mikel Arteta. Certainly the best performance, I think, of the season so far as well. And the first time I think that we've really seen this Arsenal team with its quality, with the best players available to it besides Ben White, who is out for an extended period, but with what is probably our best starting 11 at this moment in time. It was the best performance that we've seen, and it should certainly give us encouragement moving forwards as to what we can do in the games to come. We've got West Ham United, of course, this weekend away from home again. We won 5-0 last season. We've got Manchester United at home the following midweek, and plenty of opportunities to get some big results as well. So let's keep those fingers crossed that we can do just that. The lineup was, as I mentioned, very strong. Arteta rested players like Havertz and Martinelli and Rice at the weekend, and he was able to bring those 3 players back in for this game. Martin Odegaard, of course, being a key figure in that group. We'll talk more about him in a bit. And an outstanding performance, I think, from so many individual players in the game. Declan Rice, I thought, was brilliant. Partey was very good as well. Havertz, of course, worked extremely hard and linked up play in the forward line really well too. Urian Timber was gloriously progressive, and his technical ability yet again on show. Calafiori's returned to the side as if he's never left it. David Raya pulling off some really, really good saves. Saliba with a really top performance in locking down Gyokeres as much as possible. Gabriel as well, also very good in getting his goal. We'll talk about that. And Saka with a man of the match display as well. But we go through the goals. Martinelli giving Arsenal the lead first of all. Brilliant play from Partey over the top to Saka. Sorry, talk about the second goal. Timber on the right-hand side, playing that fantastic pass across the box and through to Martinelli, who all he needed to do was tap the ball into the back of the net. And that really did lift the pressure, if you like, off the performance. It was such, and Martinelli as well, of course, who's been facing scrutiny, not just from myself, but plenty of other people as well. There's been a lot of talk about where he kind of fits into Arsenal's future. but being in the right place, being alert, the darting run that he made, completely wrong-ended Quenda on their right-hand side, our left-hand side, and he was there to finish that off. But I did mention, of course, that lovely ball from Thomas Partey, which fed Bukayo Saka on the right-hand side to set up another tap-in for Kai Havertz this time to give Arsenal a 2-goal lead and certainly sit them in what they must have thought at the time was a dreamland, because this Sporting side are absolutely no joke. Before this weekend's fixtures, or this midweek fixtures, they were sitting, in the top 3 of the table in the Champions League, currently top, of course, of the Sporting Portuguese league, and have been very, very good at beating some big sides, just like Manchester City this season. But Arsenal went there with such confidence and such dominance that it never, ever gave you any inclination that this Sporting side are indeed at the level that we've come to expect from them as well. Really, really brilliant from this Arsenal team. Gabriel, though, popping up with a classic Gabriel goal from a corner, and then producing a celebration, which I think a lot of people are misinterpreting. I think obviously a lot of people are turning around and saying that Gabriel, who is imitating Gyokeres' celebration, is doing it wrongly. I think he's being a little bit cleverer than that, personally. I think there's a reason why he's doing the celebration in this way, covering his eyes rather than his mouth, because I think there is some subliminal messaging there going on, because there's been so much talk about what we've seen from Arsenal. And I think that maybe some people are going to be wanting to stick their heads in the sand in a reaction to what Arsenal's comeback might be moving forwards with this team. But yeah, Gabriel, brilliant header, very dominant performance from him, helped shut down so much of what Sporting were doing on the night, and deservedly getting back on the score sheet to score, I think, what is his 3rd headed goal from a corner, and it's only November. So that indeed is very, very impressive. The second half began, and of course, Arsenal were quickly pegged back by a quick goal from one of Sporting's own corners. And then it was always going to be about how Arsenal rode out a period of dominance, a period of momentum from Sporting. But it was, of course, a penalty that gave Arsenal something of a relief, and Arsenal did really, really well to win this. Ousmane Diomande, a player that's been linked with Arsenal in the past, a player that I and others have been very impressed by as well, had an absolute nightmare of a display and arguably shouldn't have finished the game. He was already on a yellow card from a dissent earlier on in the fixture. And how he isn't booked for a second yellow after this penalty is given, I'm not quite sure. The referee gives the penalty as well. And certainly I think if he wasn't on a yellow card, he probably should have got one then. So why he wasn't given his marching orders again, I'm not really sure. Diomande had an absolute nightmare display against Arsenal last night. That was really, really quite telling. But Saka's dispatch of the penalty in itself was a story, because all that happens whenever Saka goes to take a penalty is the flashbacks to that European Championship final. It's impossible to not hear in commentary a Saka penalty being talked about without that game, without that miss being discussed. But I think that we can all agree now that Saka has become one of the most consistent and deadly penalty takers on the continent. The way in which he finished this one was absolutely emphatic. It did not matter what the goalkeeper did. He was going to score this penalty as it smashed into the side netting. And again, very, very, very impressive indeed. Meanwhile, Arsenal finished things off in style. Mikel Moreno with a long shot from outside the box, smashed into the keeper again, who couldn't hold it. And it was Leandro Trossard who was there to add another goal to his season's tally this year as well. Really good to be in the right place at the right time, showing again the depth that we've got, showing again the impact that Trossard can make from the bench, and he can continue to be a goal scorer from that position. But overall, it was a fantastic performance from Arsenal, a brilliant performance from the team, and ultimately left us in a really good position in the Champions League table as well. The other talking point of the night, of course, that wasn't about an Arsenal player was on how Victor Gyokeres would get on against Arsenal. I saw a spectrum of views about the Swedish international's display. I thought he played quite well, considering the scraps that he had to feed off during the game. I thought Saliba and Gabriel did an excellent job in shutting down the majority of the chances that he got. That said, he still managed to create a number of opportunities for himself. He was feeding, as I say, off very little service. Fantastic run down the left-hand side in which he was unlucky not to score, smashes against the post. Shot on the right-hand side again, gets into good position, good spin, turn, and a shot over the bar. I think that for those that think that this was some kind of metric to tell us whether or not we should be signing the player, I think was always going to be a stretch too far, considering how highly we rate our own defenders, and especially Saliba and Gabriel within them. That Gyokeres wouldn't, in this Sporting side, feeding off very little, wasn't able to score, I don't think is in any way a conclusive report on whether Arsenal should be going for him. If anything, I think it actually did a lot more to encourage Arsenal supporters that Gyokeres could indeed be a really good option for them, because the way in which he did create chances from nothing, and in games where Havertz has had very little service, he can have very little impact on games if he's not given the ball a lot more and given that service. Whereas Gyokeres came and got the ball and created opportunities for himself during the fixture. He was left very frustrated, yes, and that's a credit to our defenders, but I actually thought it was a performance from the Swede which should encourage Arsenal fans to be more enamoured, I think, by him as well. And of course, that leaves Arsenal in case there is, of course, but there are indeed further fixtures this evening in the Champions League, which will change the shape of the table. But Arsenal currently do, for the first time this season, sit in the top 8 of the Champions League. It's really important that we maintain that position, because if you do finish in the top 8 after the 8 games, you will indeed be in those, you won't be in those playoff rounds. You'll be going straight through to the last 16 of the competition. There are games tonight. Borussia Dortmund can go above Arsenal. Aston Villa can go above Arsenal. And Juventus, depending upon goal difference, could potentially also go above Arsenal, but they would need to score quite a considerable number of goals to be able to do that. Lille and Celtic the same, but there isn't an expectation that that will happen to the degree that it would need to happen. Real Madrid, should they win their game, will go 1 point behind Arsenal as well. Arsenal have very favourable fixtures to come in the competition. Of course, we've got Monaco in a couple of weeks' time at home. We've still got to go to Dinamo Zagreb, or that's rather at home as well. And then there's an away game against Girona, who are really struggling. So 9 points are really, I think, up for grabs for Arsenal during this Champions League run. I would be feeling very confident about Arsenal finishing in the top 8 of the Champions League because of the games that we've still got to come. It's looking very good for Arsenal, and getting a win here was always going to be a huge, huge challenge, and they've passed it with flying colours. Let's go to part 2, though, and your comments right after this. Okay, this is part 2 of the show where we tackle some of your questions over the next 10 minutes or so. So if you've got any questions, you've got any thoughts, get them into the chat box and tell us what you're thinking and feeling about this. Let's go to Govar says, can the Thomas Partey disrespect finally stop? Undoubtedly our best midfielder when he's fully fit. That line-breaking pass was very good. I mean, the disrespect around Thomas Partey this season in terms of his performances, I don't think has even been there. I think he's been very appreciated for what he's produced on the pitch this season for Arsenal. I think Declan Rice has obviously had a slower start to the campaign, but is now gradually getting back. I thought Declan Rice's performance yesterday was excellent in how he played. So I'm not surprised that we saw such a good performance from both of those players in yesterday's performance. Michael says, I noticed that the football was more fluid and flowing on the right with Timber, Odegaard and Saka. Do you think our left-hand side needs to match that level? It's going to be very difficult, I think, for Arsenal to be able to match the levels of performance that we've come to expect on our left that we see on our right. When you've got players like Saka, Odegaard and Timber, the technical ability of those 3 players alone is better than arguably any right-hand side in world football right now. Only Liverpool maybe, and that's mainly because of Mohamed Salah, of course, could arguably rival that. You look at any other team in the world, it's very, very difficult to look up a side that have got as much technical ability. Maybe Bayern Munich with Joshua Kimmich and, of course, their players on the right-hand side that they've been using, but it's very hard to kind of argue that any other team on the planet has good of a right-hand side as what Arsenal do when they've got all of their players fully fit. The left-hand side is going to be trickier. You've got a player that is not kind of as creative as Odegaard, or nowhere near as creative as Odegaard in Declan Rice, or even as Mikel Moreno is. You've got a player in Calafiori who's not the same type of fullback as what Timber is, but is still very progressive. And then you've got Martinelli, who is technically not as good as what Saka is a lot more direct. You need to give him different types of opportunities and chances that you can give to Bukayo Saka. I don't think it's ever going to be this expectation that Arsenal can have a left-hand side that's going to be as good as the right-hand side. That's never going to happen. So we can probably kind of dull down our expectations of that. But what I do think is that Arsenal have put a lot of effort this summer in particular to try and improve things there with the signings of Calafiori, with the signing of Mikel Moreno. These signings are designed to try and change that narrative, to try and improve that left-hand side. And the work that we've done in the market to do that has obviously been thwarted by injury to both Calafiori and Moreno during this early part of the season. But with both of them back now, hopefully, that is, of course, going to be the big push that we hope we can see improve things. Rob says, why are fouls in the box adjudicated differently than anywhere else on the pitch? The foul for the penalty and the second yellow card are sendings off. Rice and Trossard, something's wrong in the way that the rules are applied. I do tend to agree. I hate this kind of difference between fouls that are given outside the box and fouls that are given inside the box being different. They shouldn't be. It's as simple as that. Nonzo says, Tom, did you ever envision a world where we would be cheering Manchester City to beat Liverpool this weekend? How quickly do you think things can change? I'm personally chanting for a draw. I'm not chanting for either side to win this game. Yes, Liverpool have got a significant gap, but Manchester City are an inevitable side. We don't want them picking up a win. We want to keep that irritation of their run going, and them getting a victory over Liverpool is only going to embolden Manchester City. So I think that we are actually looking more so for a draw in anything else in this game. We've got our own game to win at West Ham this weekend. It's never been an easy place for us to go other than maybe last season when we had that big win. But prior to that, we've had some very difficult performances and very difficult results there. We've got to do our job. We've got to keep focusing on ourselves and keep focusing on what we need to do. And everything else outside of that is different. Black Halo Man says, am I watching Ethan too closely? Every time he picks up the ball and runs forward and creates, I'm absolutely enamored by it. I agree. I can't help but be excited whenever Ethan Nwaneri is on the ball and he does something. It's so exciting to see what he's able to produce on the field for us. And I sincerely hope that we can see this contract extension that's being talked about a lot come to fruition. Of course, lock him down for the long term and him get more and more minutes. It is still frustrating to me. I will continue to bring this up. I can't help it. It's frustrating that he didn't get more minutes prior to this point, but he is getting the opportunities now, and that is really, really helping. Chan says, do you think that he will start more games in the Premier League or will he just be a sub? It's very difficult to see when you now start him in the Premier League because Martin Odegaard is back. He's going to start every single game. I think that League Cup game against Crystal Palace in the quarterfinals of the League Cup, that's a great opportunity to start him in a big game against Premier League opposition. So let's wait and see if that indeed does have its say. Anthony says, Tom, it's safe to say when the boys just play their game, they're dangerous. Instead, it feels like Arteta doesn't want them to play more possession-based. I think this is a little bit, Anthony, of a misjudgment of where Arsenal have been without Odegaard. When Odegaard's not in the side, Arsenal are not as creative. They're not as dominant. That's clear. We don't have another player like Odegaard. No team has another player like Odegaard, really. And the player of that importance, when you lose them, you suffer. Now, Arteta, over these weeks in which Odegaard has not been available, has tried to adapt. He's tried to change the way in which we've played to cope without Odegaard being there. It's not been too successful, and that's evident in the results that we've had. The arguments that Arteta has turned into a Tony Pulis type manager or into a Mourinho type manager are as a result of those results and as a result of those adaptations that we tried to change based upon the fact that we didn't have Martin Odegaard available. The reality for Arsenal is that with Odegaard in the team, they can be more expressive. They can be more dominant. Arteta got it wrong during those weeks. I don't think it's any groundbreaking opinion to have that. I think Arteta got a fair few things wrong during that period. But when we know we've got everybody fit, our style of play, philosophized by Arteta, is without question one of the best in the world. And it's why Arsenal have been as competitive and as consistent and as dominant and as dangerous as they have been over the last 2 years. It's why we only lost, up until the point where we lost that game at Bournemouth, no away games in the Premier League. So all of those things combined, I think, certainly have helped us. Let's go down to Dan, who says, man, it's going to be a shame when Partey inevitably leaves in the summer. Whoever they bring in is not going to be as good. It's going to be very difficult to replace a player who's got the level of quality, of course, of Thomas Partey. I think that so far we are heading towards that inevitability that in the summer his contract will expire and he will move on. And of course, that is going to be a spark which needs to be addressed. We need to replace that midfielder. Mikel Moreno will have transitioned quite considerably by that time and be a much more key figurehead in the team. Rice can, of course, move into that number 6 role, but I still think we would obviously need to go into the market and add another midfielder. That is going to be a priority signing in the summer alongside a couple of forwards and maybe even a defender. So it's going to be a busy summer, we hope, and it should be. And January, I think, maybe is another opportunity to add players as well. Saeed says, it seems that Arteta is more comfortable in making more subs with most of our first-team players back. Is this a clearer view on Arteta's methods and to trust him more, such as Gooner coming on earlier in games? Obviously, when you've got a player like Martin Odegaard starting, you are much more comfortable, and you're winning a game 5-1. Of course, you're going to be more comfortable in bringing on some of those players. I really do think that, the idea that we haven't suffered this season, that we haven't been unlucky or unfortunate, and that we should judge Arsenal this season purely based on the performances and nothing to do with the other things that have affected us beyond, the performances and the judgment of Arteta themselves, I think he's mad. You have to look so specifically at what we've struggled with, and it all comes back to the absence of Odegaard. It comes back to the absence of Calafiori. It comes back to the absence of Saka during certain games, and it comes back to misfortune in certain fixtures with refereeing decisions. That performance at Newcastle, for me, that's the only performance this season where I've looked at and I've gone, that is unacceptable. And that is a disgraceful, disgusting display. Everything else, I think we ultimately deserved more from. And if we didn't, there's been other factors at play, such as Bournemouth with the red card to William Saliba. It wasn't a good display up until the red card, granted, but that red card for 60 minutes of the game and being down to 10 men without Saka, without Odegaard, definitely was a big, big reason as to why the performance was like it was on that day. For me, all of those things have been answered. And I think when you've seen Saka come back to his best, as we saw yesterday, when you've seen Odegaard come back to his best, as we saw yesterday, you know how good this team can be. If a team loses its best players, it's going to suffer. And Arsenal have suffered as a result of losing their best players. But now they're back, and now we look very, very, very good indeed. Nick says, can you see City trying to go and get Zubimendi in January? Yeah, absolutely I can. They've lost Rodri, and of course Rodri isn't exactly like a spring chicken anymore. He's in his prime years, in his mid to late 20s. So they're always going to be on the lookout for that long-term replacement, and Zubimendi is a very natural replacement, although he's a slightly different type of footballer. He already replaces him at the international level with Spain when he's not there. So it does make a lot of sense. And yeah, I can absolutely see that being something that is looked at. Daniel says, Brian and Mbeumo or Anthony Semenyo in January, and Mbeumo without a doubt. And Mubarak says, now Arsenal puts up a bigger statement for the next matches as well. Absolutely they have. Lloyd says, in the last 2 games, the boys looked free and the way that we've played was brilliant. I hope this continues. Did we pocket the best hitman in the game in Gyokeres? I mean, certainly we did a very good job at preventing what he was bringing to this team. I feel like I might have missed some comments and questions, so I'll scroll up a bit. Lee says, do you think that player fitness has been key to our improvement? Well, without question. Arsenal players are being able to be rotated more. We're able to play our stronger team. We're able to play fitter players. And, players like Ben White, who have been struggling with problems, have been forced to play until now. And now hopefully he gets the recovery and the action that he needs to be able to come back even stronger. Jean says, didn't you feel sorry for Sporting yesterday? First time I could hear away fans in the European game in Portugal. I mean, I think that's more about how impressive our away supporters were yesterday as well. I think that it's really, really very impressive of how our away fans are away from home, with the chanting, with the noise, with the atmosphere that they generate. And I think it's not about how poor the home side can be when you're losing. I think it's more so about how impressive our away fans are, actually. Rob says, how many points wins the Premier League? Absolutely no idea. Probably less than last season, but it depends on how Liverpool get on and if they have any slip-ups and if they have a dip in form themselves in the coming weeks. We sincerely hope that they will. Jaffa says, who do you realistically think that we could go for? Again, I have absolutely no idea, Jaffa. There's no indications on who it might be that Arsenal go for. We know that there's interest in Gyokeres. We know there's interest in Isak. The idea that Arsenal would go for either of those 2 players in January seems a far-fetched dream at this point, and I just cannot see that happening whatsoever. I think Arsenal need to look at getting elite players in. We need to be looking at getting players that are producing at a very, very high standard on a European stage as well. it's not going to be, these upcoming signings are not going to be about adding the Tomiyasus of this world to the team that are just kind of adding depth. Arsenal need to go and add quality players to this team. It's going to be tricky in January because restrictions on spending and, of course, restrictions in general about who's available in January will make that very hard. But the summer has got to be a really big one to add to this team as well. I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in and appreciating the efforts that go on here. Of course, it's a shorter show than it would be usually because I am away at the moment, but I hope you're appreciating the effort that goes into putting these shows on while I am indeed away. Please do drop a like on the video before you go and subscribe. One more show here in Spain before I return to England on Friday to bring you the usual shows from the studio. So thank you for listening. Have a fantastic Wednesday. Let's hope for some more fortuitous results in the Champions League in the evening tonight, and hope that, of course, we can build up to that game against West Ham at the weekend in fine fashion and form too. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful, and as always, up the Arsenal and adios.